Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome to the channel. We have some breaking news. The main event of UFC 292 will be Aljamain Sterling defending his bantamweight title against Sean O'Malley August 19th in Boston. And this is a massive fight announcement. This is going to be my reaction and early prediction. And we're also going to discuss the real reason that Dana White made this announcement, along with a bunch of other announcements. He also announced UFC 291, the entire main card, including the main event, which will be Dustin Poirier versus Justin Gaethje 2. I'm going to make an entire dedicated video on UFC 291. As soon as that's done, I will link it down in the description as well as the end cards if you want to go check it out after this. But we are getting Aljamain Sterling versus Sean O'Malley. And I had my doubts whether or not this would actually happen. And I have my doubts if the contracts are even signed for this fight. And we're going to talk about that later in the video. But as far as my reaction to this fight, I have mixed feelings because Sean O'Malley, in my opinion, he really doesn't deserve a title fight. You know, of his UFC wins, he has one win over a UFC fighter currently on the roster, and that was a robbery win against Petr Yan. But at the end of the day, I don't feel like we can live in a world where we can say, well, I didn't agree with that decision, so therefore he doesn't deserve a title shot. And also, I don't feel particularly bad about it because the true number one contender right now is Merab Dvalishvili. He's not fighting Aljamain Sterling. So nobody's getting skipped over for Sean O'Malley, even though Sean O'Malley's only on a 4-fight winning streak. And really, he should be on a 1-fight losing streak. And he has wins over Raulian Paiva, no longer in the UFC. Chris Monteiro, no longer in the UFC. Thomas Almeida, no longer in the UFC. And then the Petr Yan win at UFC 280 was very questionable to say the least. I thought Petr Yan won that fight 30-27. But at the end of the day, I'm not the judges. Okay, the judges gave it to O'Malley. And if O'Malley got a win over Petr Yan, who at the time was ranked number 1 in the rankings, former champion, elite level bantamweight fighter, who am I to say O'Malley doesn't deserve a title shot? Especially when you look at the rankings, outside of Merab, there's no one else more deserving of a title shot based on credentials, based on resume. There's nobody else other than Sean O'Malley. I mean, you look at the division. Okay, Corey Sandhagen, he's on a 2-fight winning streak, but he has a dominant loss to Aljamain Sterling in the last 2 to 3 years. So do you really give it to Corey Sandhagen? And supposedly they're working on Corey Sandhagen versus Umar Nurmagomedov. So at the end of the day, I'm not going to complain about this fight too much. I love the matchup. It's very fun. I think it's very interesting in the bantamweight division. You have Aljamain Sterling, who hasn't been getting the level of respect that he deserves. And I'm part of that problem as well. I haven't been showing him enough respect. He gets the win against Henry Cejudo. In my opinion, it was a fair scorecard. Outside of Derek clearly giving the wrong round to Aljo to secure him the decision. Round 5 was clearly Henry Cejudo. But nonetheless, very competitive fight. I have no problem with that decision to go into Aljamain Sterling. And he's just proven time and time again that he is one of the elite at bantamweight. It doesn't matter that you don't like his fighting style. It doesn't matter that you don't like that he got a DQ and put on an acting performance to win the title against Petr Yan. Since then, he went out there and beat Petr Yan, even though that's a questionable decision as well. But nonetheless, it was highly competitive. It was not a robbery. And I thought Petr Yan won, but it was still not a robbery. He beat TJ Dillashaw. I understand people can discredit that as well with the shoulder injury. He came in with the shoulder injury. He dominated TJ Dillashaw, and then he beat Henry Cejudo. The gripe there is Henry Cejudo coming back after 3 years off. I just feel like if we keep playing this game, you can just play it forever. You know, if he goes out there and dominates Sean O'Malley, people are going to say, well, O'Malley's resume was garbage. At the end of the day, Sean O'Malley competed with Petr Yan. I didn't think it was super close, but it was a competitive fight, and Sean O'Malley has shown, even though it hasn't been against the best competition, he is an elite level striker. He is one of the better strikers in the bantamweight division. And Aljamain Sterling has shown that his striking from a technical standpoint isn't that great, but where he wins fights is with his grappling and control on the ground, particularly in that back position, that back mount where he's looking for a rear naked choke. And I just think this is one of those fights that I think there'll be a decent amount of hype going into it. I don't think this is going to sell over 1 million pay-per-view buys, but I think this is a quality matchup. And I know a lot of people are going to say Sean O'Malley doesn't have a chance. And I'm going to give my early prediction here in a little bit because of the ground game of Aljamain Sterling. Because Aljamain Sterling, once he gets you down, the jiu-jitsu is unbelievable. The top game is unbelievable. But Sean O'Malley has shown in the past against Petr Yan, he can be taken down with ease. And people are going to say Aljamain Sterling can dominate him on the ground. As much of an advantage that Aljamain Sterling has in the grappling and jiu-jitsu, Sean O'Malley has that same level of advantage on the feet. And guess what? Where every fight starts, it starts on the feet. So even though I believe Sterling's grappling and ground game is significantly better than Sean O'Malley's, Sean O'Malley, in that same retrospect, you can say the same thing about his striking. O'Malley's striking is leaps and bounds better than Aljamain Sterling's. Now, Sterling is able to use his grappling to set up his striking, but still, I mean, the way Aljamain Sterling just rushes forward very sloppy, and O'Malley has accurate striking and KO power, has some of the best power in the division, if not, for the smaller weight classes in general. There's a chance O'Malley can win this fight. He could go out there and KO Aljamain Sterling. And I think if you were one of these people who want Aljamain Sterling to lose, I think Sean O'Malley is the last chance. I think Sean O'Malley is the last chance at bantamweight. Because I think if Sterling beats Sean O'Malley, I think he's going to ask for a featherweight title shot. I think he's going to want to move up. I think he's going to be done with the division, and he's going to say, look, my guy Merab is waiting in the wings. We'll let Merab go. So Sean O'Malley, if you want to see Aljamain Sterling lose, your only shot is Sean O'Malley, most likely. But I do think that this is one of those fights that honestly could go either way. I'm confident in my pick, but I still do believe, because of everything I've already stated, I think it could go either way. An early prediction for this fight, I have to go Aljamain Sterling. I may change my mind. I don't know. I doubt it. I just saw what Petr Yan was able to do to Sean O'Malley in his ability to take him down. And Petr Yan wasn't prioritizing top game. He was prioritizing damage. And he was prioritizing landing shots as Sean O'Malley worked his way to his feet. If Aljamain Sterling gets you down, he's prioritizing control first. Then he's looking for a submission. Look what he did to Corey Sandhagen. Absolutely destroyed him in the first round. Took him down, rear naked choke. First 3 minutes of the fight, 2 minutes of the fight. I don't remember the exact length of the fight. But if he gets Sean O'Malley down, I just don't think O'Malley's getting up. I do not believe O'Malley's getting up. But Sterling doesn't have the best entries to takedowns. He doesn't. He just does not have the best entries. And O'Malley's very slick on the feet. And because he's so slick on the feet, he can keep his hands low, ready to defend takedowns. And then on top of that, O'Malley's been sitting out since October, waiting and saying, look, I'm fighting either Henry Cejudo, an Olympic wrestler, or Aljamain Sterling, who wants to take you down, grapple you, look for a rear naked choke. And so he's been preparing nonstop. He's been preparing nonstop with his defensive wrestling. There is no doubt in my mind. And also with his jiu-jitsu, because he knows how good Aljamain Sterling's jiu-jitsu is. And I think this is one of those fights where, people think I hate Sean O'Malley. I don't hate Sean O'Malley. I hate his cult-like following, I hate the fact that people excused away that loss to Marlon Chito Vera, where he got his legs brutally chopped. Then he got ground and pound KO'd. And then he was stretchered out of the cage with no serious injury. And people made excuses for that. But realistically, that was 3 years ago now. That was 3 years ago, almost exactly to the date of UFC 292. And this is a totally different style matchup. I believe Sean O'Malley, because he's still young, he's still improving rapidly, and he has the power to put Aljamain Sterling's lights out. And if he can defend the takedown long enough, and every fight starts on the feet, even if he can delay the takedown till the last minute of the round by using his footwork and using his feints and using his striking to disrupt Aljamain Sterling's timing, he could win this fight. I think Sean O'Malley could win this fight, but I just think Aljamain Sterling's going to get a takedown early and probably find a rear naked choke. I would say first or second round rear naked choke win for Aljamain Sterling. But I do believe the UFC is stacking this in Sean O'Malley's favor. Aljamain Sterling cuts a lot of weight. He just fought at UFC 288 in May of 2023. They're asking for a very quick 3-month turnaround for Aljamain Sterling. So Sterling, said recently in an interview, I saw some clips online where he's saying, look, I don't know if I'm going to be able to fight in August. I got to heal up some injuries and take some time off. Sterling's got to jump right back into training camp. He's going to have to cut weight rather soon. And I think the UFC is doing this because they do not want Aljamain Sterling as a champion. I don't think Dana and the UFC want Aljamain Sterling as a champion. And they're hoping, because they're giving O'Malley this edge, O'Malley hasn't fought since last October. Aljamain Sterling just fought a week and a half ago. So they are giving this advantage to Sean O'Malley. Sterling's going to have to cut weight. He's going to have a quick turnaround. And I think they're hoping that Sean O'Malley pulls it off. And I also think there's a chance this fight doesn't happen doesn't happen at UFC 292, because I really truly believe the UFC, they've done this in the past, they announce fights that aren't signed in order to use the MMA community to pressure fighters into taking fights. Aljamain Sterling just did an interview yesterday where he was like, look, it'd be more ideal for September, but maybe I could fight in August. Depends on how my body's feeling in the next week or so. I'll be able to decide. It wouldn't shock me if Aljamain Sterling comes out very soon and says, look, I haven't signed any bout agreement. And I'm not necessarily going to be ready for mid-August when I just fought and it's mid-May right now. So that's 3 months. If he wants an 8-week training camp, he's got to get right back in there and start training again. Then he's got to cut weight again on a fairly quick turnaround. So I do think there is a chance that this fight is not signed. Does it ultimately happen? I would say probably yes, because I think if he doesn't, I think the fan base is going to turn even more on him. I think Dana White's going to go after him. And it wouldn't shock me if Dana White just says, okay, we're stripping Sterling of the belt. I don't think they like Aljamain Sterling at all. And I think they already targeted this August card, UFC 292, for this bantamweight title fight previous to Sterling versus Cejudo. Cejudo's corner was talking about it in between rounds and saying August 19th. And I think the UFC and Dana White really want this fight to take place. And I do believe the real reason they announced this with such urgency, along with UFC 291, Dustin Poirier versus Justin Gaethje, which I'll be making that entirely separate dedicated video on, they announced it because of the Francis Ngannou news. The news came out today that Francis Ngannou signed with PFL. I did an entire video on it. I will link it down in the description as well if you want to go check that out after this. They announced this news because the UFC and Dana White are very petty. They didn't want to see Francis Ngannou have any headlines. They didn't want to see him get any good publicity from the MMA community, especially with a law right now, especially with you got Mackenzie Dern, Angela Hill coming up. So the UFC said, you know what can we do? Dana White rushed into the office this morning when he saw Francis Ngannou's new PFL contract, his substantial, groundbreaking PFL contract, historic. And Dana White said, oh my God, what fights can we announce? And he said, I'm announcing all of 291. I'm announcing 292's main event, which is Aljamain Sterling versus Sean O'Malley. And I'm really going to bury Francis Ngannou's new signing to PFL news. I really think that's what's going on here. And I don't think there's really any doubt about that. And I'm going to talk about and expand on that more in the UFC 291 video. But Aljamain Sterling versus Sean O'Malley, UFC 292 main event. I'm really looking forward to it, but I really think the UFC is stacking the deck against Aljamain Sterling. They are hoping that he loses the bantamweight title, and that's why they are asking for such a quick turnaround. If Aljamain Sterling wins, I really do believe he's probably going to try to go up. If Sean O'Malley wins, I don't think Sterling's getting a rematch. I don't think, even if it's like a controversial split decision, I don't think Aljamain Sterling would get a rematch. But it's going to be very interesting if Sean O'Malley wins, because Merab Dvalishvili is going to be next in line. So can you imagine a world where early 2024 we're seeing Sean O'Malley versus Merab Dvalishvili? That sounds like a lot of fun. And honestly, I think the best case scenario for the fans and for the UFC is Sean O'Malley winning this fight, because his style is so fan-friendly. And on top of that, I think, we could use a refresh in the top of the bantamweight division. For me, I can't get over that Aljamain Sterling DQ win against Petr Yan where he put on the acting performance of a lifetime. So I'm actually rooting for Sean O'Malley a little bit in this fight, even though my prediction right now is Aljamain Sterling. But this is going to be a very interesting fight. I'm curious to see what Aljamain Sterling comes out and says in the next couple hours or so. Is he going to come out and say, I've never signed a bout agreement? I'm very interested to see what happens. I'm very curious to see how this fight plays out. But if Aljamain Sterling's able to get it to the ground, I think it's over. If Sean O'Malley can keep it standing for long periods of time, I think he'll win this fight, and I think he'll brutally KO Aljamain Sterling. Let me know what you guys think about all this news down in the comments. Also, make sure to check out my Francis Ngannou video as well as my UFC 291 video, which I'll be making shortly. As soon as they're done, they'll be linked down in the description. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.